Hello and welcome to a graphing tutorial with me, Mr. Wolf, your physics teacher. That's intro music for our television show or episode that I'm creating right now. So what I'm going to be doing today is showing you how to make a graph on Google Drive, formerly known as Google Docs. First thing that I want you to do before we even start talking about this is look at your lab handout. If you need to make a graph with a trend line or a best fit line, you cannot do it on Google Drive. You must do it in Excel. Google Drive does not calculate that for you and will not produce that. So if you need to make a best fit line to calculate either the slope or say to be able to predict the data or look at the regression value for how accurate it is, you cannot do that on Google Drive. You must do it in Excel. So take a moment, check, make sure that whether or not you have to do that, and plan accordingly. Now, if you are able to make your graph on Google Drive, I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you the steps to go to how to create the graph and a couple helpful hints. So what I have here is some random data that I've made up, some fake data. It's basically for the pendulum lab, which if you're doing this should look fairly similar. So I have a couple independent variables. These are the variables that I'm going to change. So the mass is one of them, string length is another independent variable, and then the last variable that I measured was period, and this is my dependent variable over here. And what I want to do is I want to go through and I want to look and see what how the effects of the string length and the mass are on the period and be able to compare the two of them. So the first thing I need to do to make a chart is I'm going to click Insert, and you can go down to Chart right here, or you can just click Insert Chart up here on the little toolbar. So I'm going to click that, and since I have nothing selected, no data selected, it's just going to, especially here in this box that I have selected here, if I were to do that in, say, this spot here, it would give me an entirely different result. Now, the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to go click on More Charts. We're almost always going to use an XY scatter, and this here is what it shows up as. So let's take a look at this. This is our first look at this chart. This is what Google automatically produces for us, and this looks like absolutely nothing. I have no idea what they are trying to produce. It looks kind of random. It's a nice pretty little box shape, maybe a sideways U. I don't really know. We got some connect the dots here. You can make a C perhaps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Advanced Edit. I'm going to go right here to Select Ranges. First thing I want to do is I'm going to delete this starting range. Now I want to select my X values first. So my X values for this first set here is going to be string length. So I'm selecting my X values there, and I'm going to add another range. Adding this second range gives me now the Y values. So here I'm going to select the Y values like so. Click OK. Now if you notice, I have 6 values selected here, but I only have 5 points showing up. What Google Docs or Google Drive does automatically is it uses this point right here. It says use row 2 as headers. You want to unclick that so that way that other point will show up. I don't know why they have some of these automatic features, but they are there, and I guess it works for some other things. So if I were to maybe select string length and period, that would be the headers that they would show up in there. So now I'm going to click on Customize, and I'm going to create, first off, you always want to add a title, so I'm going to go here, Graph, I want to make sure I'm selected in this box, so I'm going to go Graph, number, I'm going to just make it large, 1. And I'm going to go back and fix my typing, which is not my strong point. Now, I can change the font, everything else, and notice how the title pops right up there, features, where it is, all that stuff. So that's all things that you can do. Now I can go down to the axes and I can change all the values, the titles, the different things. I can go in here, I can horizontal, left, vertical, I can change it all around like that. I can add different grid lines, I can add minor, etc., number format, all sorts of different things. But I'm not going to go into that. There are certain things you need to do for your graphs, but I'm not. You know, based on this, enough of how to do it now. So here it is. Here's my updated graph. Now the first thing that I want to do, actually, it's always nicer. I'm going to move it to its own sheet, and I'm going to title this sheet down here. So what I did was on the graph, and I'll show you that in a second. I just in the upper corner you can select move to own sheet. So I'm going to click down here. I'm going to rename this sheet graph number 1. Here it is. Here's my first graph. I haven't done any labeling. That's for you to do. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to make a second graph. I'm going to do this kind of quickly here so you can just follow along. I'm going to select a more, scatter, points. Again, it's the weird values. Go here. I'm going to delete this. Oh, I'm going to delete this. My x values now are mass. I'm going to add another range. My y values are still the period. That's the dependent variable. Okay. I'm going to remove this as the header right there. And I'm going to create a title just so I'm going to go just call this one. Ugh. Got to make sure I select all this. Just call. I didn't do it again. I don't know what's happening. There we have 2. Just call this one 2. Insert. And there it is. I'm once again going to move this into its own sheet. I'm going to call this one rename it. Alright. 2. Now if I look at this graph, okay, I could say well, on graph 2 the values decrease as I change the mass. Alright, that shows that. And here the values increase, whatever my y value is, increased as I increase the length. Okay. But if I look closer, I'm looking here and I see, okay, it starts at 0 and it goes to 0.08 on the y-axis. It starts at 0 and goes to 0.02. Those aren't the same values, so I want to make sure that if I'm comparing graphs, I want to be able to look at about the same actual graph data. Now I can't obviously change my x-axis because those 2 independent variables, mass and string length, are completely different. But I can go through here and I'm going to start it, and just to make it so it goes from 0 to 0.8, I'm going to look here and we'll start this, and if I click on the axis I have that option, 0, and it goes to 0.8. And so if I click it, now the change, oh excuse me, it's not 0.8 but 0.08, and still that's much better. But now the change is much less significant than before. So the change in what I had here as my y-axis value of the period was much less than here. There was a significant amount of change as I changed the independent variable, whereas here it kind of goes up, it goes down, not a significant difference. So it's important to make sure that you are looking at the scale of graphs in order to when you are comparing them together. Now, as always, you need to have your graphs labeled, and you need to have units and different things on the y-axis. It's also, if you're going to graph multiple sets of data on one graph, you can go through and do that. For example, let me show you how to do that right now. I'm going to go to Advanced Edit. I'm going to add another range. So I'm going to select range. Actually, for this one, I can't do it, but you could, if you had the same x values here, you could go through and do it. But because I have different independent variables, so you can't go through it. But you can add a second range, so you can add more stuff as long, more y values for maybe say different things, just to be able to compare them. But let's add this and go to here, and I'm going to add. So now this here is going to compare. This shows the change in the period for the string length. And actually I need to go in here and kind of just edit it a little bit. One thing. 7. Compared to that same change for the mass. notice how it can't graph both things on the x-axis at the same time, but I can show this in there. This is not really useful for this particular lab, but it may be useful for other labs where you have the same x values or the same independent variables. Hopefully you find this helpful. You can always rewind and look back at the beginning to look at parts that you may have missed or have questions on. And as always, I want you to go through and kind of play around and have some fun with this and try and figure it out on your own. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, and come see me in class if you have any questions.